Good morning and welcome to this session 5 on advancing public health, strengthening collaboration for surveillance and response. My name is Joanna Hannefeld. I am the acting vice president of the Robert Koch Institute, Germany's National Public Health Institute, and the director of its Center for International Health Protection. And it's my great pleasure and honor to co-chair this session with Dr. Nathalie Mayet, my esteemed colleague and mentor from South Africa. I wanted to say a big thank you to Rwanda Biomedical Center for hosting us. It's been wonderful so far. Thank you to all of you for this fantastic meeting, and thank you also to the IANPHI Secretariat for bringing us together. So this morning's session really focuses on the role of NPHIs in preparedness and response. And I think all of us here, and yesterday we already heard a bit of it in the opening session, I think all of us have the experience that whatever our role is, it's been central, right, to response of epidemics and to preparedness activities. So NPHIs are certainly a central actor, and I think most of us also have a clear sense that over the past 4 years or 4.5 years in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has woken up a little bit to NPHIs and their importance. And there are many important initiatives now ongoing which try to bring together different aspects of our work. And we'll hear of some of those. And I guess the overall aim is to establish or build a global health architecture where NPHIs are networked in such a way that for preparedness and response, we can work in the most efficient and effective way together and are supported. So that's no small task, but we've got lots of great colleagues here who will reflect from their perspective. We'll hear about different initiatives. The session we'll do today is we're also going to have a good cop and a bad cop, like yesterday morning. So I'm the bad cop and Natalie's the good cop. We'll have a set of presentations. We're really, really happy to have 6 great speakers. 5 of them are here, and we've got Dr. Joy from the Caribbean online. We'll have 8-minute presentations from each of the presenters, and then we'll hopefully have loads of time for discussion and for sharing of experiences. So I really look forward to you already thinking about your reflections, your experiences, what we need to do. And colleagues, just a word of advice, I will be keeping you to 8 minutes. That's the bad cop bit. But I really look forward to our discussions, and I hand over to Nathalie, please.
Thank you to my co-chair. Good morning, colleagues. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be part of this esteemed panel. We look forward to the presentations and the inputs. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, which is Sarah Hersey. She's the Director of Collaborative Intelligence at the Division of Health Emergency Intelligence and Surveillance at the WHO. And Sarah, we look forward to your input. Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll do it from here, I think. So I really appreciate the invitation to talk today. I'm going to talk a bit about how we're seeing the evolution of surveillance within the WHO health emergencies, how that's reflected, and also how we can help take these discussions to action. I think that was a call that our colleagues put forth yesterday, and I think it's really important, and particularly to get the feedback from the folks in the room about how we can actually better support national public health institutes. So just a little bit of a background. I think many here were in leadership positions during the COVID response, and this is just an example of the way that we traditionally look at surveillance data. These are cases and mortality data over time. It looks very simple, it looks very linear, but we all know that while this is important information, this is just not enough. It's not enough to make timely decisions. It's not enough to make informed decisions, and it's not enough to serve us over the course of an emergency about how do we launch a public health response. So next slide. So actually, this is how we experienced COVID. We saw huge different types of data that were really important to serve us in making decisions. We had the epidemiological data. We really needed to focus on the clinical data for timely decision-making, environmental data, economic data, social data. So really what we've done within WHO is rethink how we're looking at surveillance. And we frame this as what we call collaborative surveillance. And that is to say there are traditional data sources. We have to be supporting traditional and foundational surveillance work, but we also have to look beyond that. And how do we build in other types of information and decision-making? All right. Okay. Sorry. We also know that there's a lot of different types of decisions that we have to make over the course of an emergency. So in the beginning, we have to understand, is this truly an outbreak? And is there human-to-human transmission? How do we do rapid containment? What are the characteristics of the pathogen? And then looking at mortality and morbidity data. How are our facilities coping as the emergency ramps up? What types of public health and social measures do we need to put in place, and are they effective? Are we looking at new variants? Are there mutations in the disease that we're experiencing? And then how do we transition at the end? And all of these are questions that we need to be answering through different types of surveillance data, understanding that not one system is going to be able to answer all of them. Next slide. So within the Health Emergencies Program at WHO 2 years ago, we actually established an additional division. We used to have the division of preparedness, which was very much disease-specific and IHR. And the response was very focused on acute response and humanitarian disasters. But what we didn't have was a pathogen-agnostic way of building systems that addressed early detection, monitoring, and then transition. So we established a new division called Intelligence and Surveillance Systems. We have one department that sits in Geneva, and it is more of the traditional surveillance that we know. It's standards and guidelines, as well as our capacity building work that we do. And then we also have two departments that are based in what's called the Berlin Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. And one is Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence Systems, and that's looking at building in new tools, new strategies, new partnerships, new types of data for surveillance. And then the other one is called Collaborative Intelligence, and that's the department that I lead. And for us, it's a very different way of doing business. We're saying, how do we use our ability as conveners to bring people together around identifying what priorities are and responding to priorities? So we're not here to lead the way for everything. We're actually here to help support and pull partners together in a collaborative way. Next slide. So one of the things that we found, our foundational work for this is called collaborative surveillance, and it's part of the WHO Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Framework, or the HEPR framework, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Next slide, please. And so within collaborative surveillance, we have three different kind of intertwining pieces. One is strengthening national integrated disease, threat, and vulnerability surveillance. The second one is bringing in collaborative and new approaches for event detection, risk assessment, and response monitoring. And the third piece that we're weaving in is the laboratory diagnostics, including the pathogen and genomic surveillance. And so we see these different pieces are able to support across the different sectors of surveillance. So often we just do surveillance for a specific disease threat, but also looking across, making this multi-sectoral or One Health, also across the emergency cycle, because we need to employ surveillance differently at different times in the emergency, as well as at geographic levels. So looking at both national, subnational, and very importantly, we need to be focusing on community and facility level monitoring. Next slide, please. So what makes this a bit different is that we say that everything that we want to do needs to be grounded in capacity building as well as collaboration. We can only get so far if we're going alone or if we're purely focusing on the technical. So we have committed to focusing on collaboration as well as capacity building. And this is not intended to integrate everything or disrupt. We're really looking at how do we pull together elements of vertical disease systems, how we might be able to integrate at specific areas, but how actually we need to be looking at interconnection rather than integration. Next slide. So two things that I wanted to focus on. One is, how do we support national public health agencies in this work? We had a collaboration last year that we hosted the first convening of national public health agencies to help us define what the priorities were for them going forward in a way that WHO Health Emergencies Program can support. And we defined a couple of core areas. One is in defining emergency preparedness and response functions, particularly at a policy level, documenting and disseminating different governance policies, regulatory and financing structures, and building networks of peer-to-peer learning opportunities. So we've had, you can see a couple of our colleagues in this room were featured on our first webinar. So thank you to it was Namibia, Singapore, and Jordan. And we are on Friday, so tomorrow, going to be hosting a coordination meeting on defining these core capacities. Also, very importantly, is sustainable financing models as well as strengthening workforce development. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to touch on a new network that we launched in May of 2023, which is the International Pathogen Surveillance Network. And this is a global network bringing together pathogen genomics community to improve public health decision-making. And what's very important is that we're focusing on country capacity building. So everything that we do at a global level needs to have eventually have some type of capacity building for the countries. And so we really kind of went through the vision a couple of different times and landed on the vision is every country has equitable access to sustained capacity for genomic sequencing and analytics as part of its public health surveillance systems. So it's no longer that bright, shiny object that gets some focus in emergencies, but it's integrated into national surveillance systems, and that equitable access doesn't mean that every country has to do everything, but they have to have access to the resources to support them. I might have one more minute.
1 more minute.
1 more minute, thanks. And so we have a couple of different communities that we're supporting. One is a communities of practice, specifically the first one's data sharing, and the second one is environment and vector surveillance. We have a country scale-up accelerator, which is convening countries to define priorities and deliver on high priority activities. And then we also have a group of funders. So we're helping to try to bring high-level advocacy to financing. I would be very interested if there's people in the room that want to participate in this. I'm happy to provide additional information. We have a number of core packages we're launching in the next week. A catalytic grants fund for lower middle income countries to finance genomics research. We have a country capacity framework that's in development, building a global investment case, and then also defining use cases. I might have gone over 8, but I'm scared of you, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much for that presentation. You've introduced several exciting concepts that have emerged and also how to bring these together. So now it's my pleasure to go to Dr. Scott Dowell. Scott Dowell is now Senior Advisor for the Global Health Emergency Corps at WHO headquarters, and he's going to introduce that idea. And I'm going to allow myself to preface that by saying, obviously, that is one of the other initiatives that very much has come out of the realization that the world wasn't as prepared as it should have been, and of the central role of NPHI. So, I'm really curious to hear how that is developing, and I imagine that many others in the room are too. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johanna. And it's great to be here, and I will try and stick to my 8 minutes also. I only have 2 slides. One is a title slide that you can put up, and let's see, is that any better? Apologies. Okay. At dinner last night, it became clear to me that we all experienced the pandemic in slightly different ways. My own experience was, go back 1 slide, please. My own experience was from Seattle, where I was leading the pandemic response for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation before I moved to Geneva to work on this emergency corps with WHO. In Seattle, if you know your US geography, we're on the far western side. And so we were at least 9 hours, sometimes 18 hours behind everybody else in the room in terms of experiencing the pandemic. In fact, those in the Western Pacific were at the front edge, at the leading edge. And not just figuratively, literally, the virus emerged, as we all know, in the Western Pacific. And in many ways, countries in the Western Pacific were at the forefront of the response, responding aggressively and early and successfully, slowing or containing the spread of COVID for months, sometimes years. I'm thinking of places like Singapore, China, Australia, New Zealand, and others. But ultimately, those of us on the other side of the world in the West had problems. In the US, we had terrible problems with COVID, and other Western countries from Brazil to Russia to Italy and others had problems. And ultimately, the virus got to everybody. For some countries, in fairness, the aggressive countries, not until some of the most vulnerable in their populations were protected by vaccines. So credit to them for that. But the lesson that we were reminded of, and it wasn't a new lesson, is that no country can fight a pandemic alone. And even an effective island nation like New Zealand is ultimately going to have to work with other countries if we're going to be successful. SARS-CoV-2 was more transmissible than MERS or SARS-1, but far less lethal. There is no biological reason why the next pathogen couldn't be equally transmissible, but far more lethal. And if that happens, we're all in trouble. And I think we all know that. What would we want to have in place in the eventuality of such a transmission? And the next slide is just an initial view of the Global Health Emergency Corps, which WHO thinks of as a well-coordinated health emergency workforce that's centered in countries. And very important that each country has the elements of the Global Health Emergency Corps, illustrated by the pyramid there. So we think of the overall public health workforce pyramid, and then the blue subsets are in 3 layers. At the base are the emergency workforce. These are the community health workers, the epidemiologists, the microbiologists who respond to health emergencies, outbreaks, and if they're effective, they stop or they contain those outbreaks closest to where they begin. This is what we want to see happen. We also know that that doesn't always work, and sometimes pathogens threaten to overwhelm local areas, and surge response is needed. This is the work of all of you. National Public Health Institutes always send surge teams out to different parts of the country. So much of this happens within the country. Sometimes it has to cross borders, and we have effective systems like GORM, like the emergency medical teams, standby partners, and others. Those exist, but they could be even better. They could be better coordinated and more interoperable. So that's an important part of Global Health Emergency Corps. And that will, if it works well, ensure that no district and no country is overwhelmed. But then there is still the possibility of a pathogen like COVID, where nearly every country is affected at the same time. And moving teams from place to place is really a minor part of the response. What really is needed is everybody working together in the same direction. And how does that happen? Those connected leaders at the top of the pyramid is the vision for that. The top 2 to 5 people in each country who are likely to be involved in the critical decisions about, do we have to close borders? What about the vaccine effectiveness? Is a shutdown needed? And those critical decisions, can they be connected? Can they be empowered? Can they be informed about the best information ahead of time so that we increase the likelihood of a coordinated, effective global response better than we did with COVID? I would just say that of these different layers, it's all challenging for me and a bit overwhelming. But the top one, the connected leaders, is perhaps the newest and the most challenging to think about. How does that network happen and how does it work? And I was reminded and reassured last night at dinner that part of that connected network exists already. We have in the room some of the people who are at the most critical public health jobs in countries around the world who already know each other, trust each other. They're colleagues, but they're also friends. And so if we imagine the pandemic of a lethal pathogen starting today, we can imagine a Zoom call tonight where we get on the phone, we exchange, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? How are you responding? What's working and what's not working? And so when many of you are called into the Prime Minister's office tomorrow morning, to say, what do we know about this thing? Do we have to close borders? What do we recommend? You're empowered with information. You say, I've just talked to my colleagues around the world, and my trusted colleagues in Japan have been working on the Diamond Princess. They have clear evidence of pre-symptomatic transmission. And Madam Prime Minister, that means closing borders is going to have a minor impact, if at all, but we ought to think about exponentially scaling up diagnostic testing or whatever the decision may be. The point is, we don't know what the next pandemic is going to be from. We can be sure that it's going to be different than the last one. And this kind of connected network is going to be important to try and improve the probability of containment. So I'll stop there. I'll say tomorrow in the side meeting, we have an opportunity to go into some more depth on Global Health Emergency Corps and work in particular on pandemic fund applications, framing the workforce component in these Global Health Emergency Corps concepts. And we would be very happy to support countries or groups of countries who want to do that. I'll look forward to the discussion about that tomorrow. If you are unable to join tomorrow, feel free to pull me aside or send a note. We have a mailbox, ghec@who.int. That's Global Health Emergency Corps, ghec@who.int, and we can correspond that way. Thank you.
The importance of connected leaders. Certainly, I think the acknowledgement of this room being further connected and expanding this network is highly appreciated. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my brother, Dr. Tajuddin. He's the head of the Public Health Institute and Research Division at Africa CDC. And we look forward to hearing his experience and the way thinking in terms of regional support to build surveillance capacity in Africa. Taj, over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. Colleagues, good morning once again. So let me start with the Africa CDC strategic priority, which I did projected yesterday. And if you recall very well, emergency preparedness and response is a core pillar of the Africa CDC next 5-year strategic plan. So it was in that regard that at the margin of the World Health Assembly 2023, most of you were there last year in Geneva, we launched what we call the Joint Emergency Preparedness and Response Action Plan, which is Africa CDC together with WHO Afro and WHO EMRO. Now, there's a context to that. Over the years, the continent usually record around 100 emergency or disease outbreaks per year. And in 2023 alone, we recorded over 150, again, which called for the importance of collaboration, coordination, communication, and cooperation. Now, this JEEP, not the four-wheel drive now, the Joint Emergency Preparedness and Response Action Plan, is a 5-year strategic collaboration, which is aimed at boosting emergency preparedness and response capacity of our member states so that they're able to manage efficiently and effectively any disease outbreak. And for the JEEP, there are strategic or there are priority areas that has been outlined as where we are going to be focusing and supporting our member states to build their capacity. So this includes genomic sequencing so that we're able to detect some of these outbreaks as early as possible. It also includes surveillance and disease intelligence, which is in line with what Sarah has cleverly articulated. It includes stockpiling of emergency supplies. Of course, we have a lot of lessons to learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, because we also are a continent of 1.4 billion people, 55 member states, have to wait for what trickle down or what is trickling down after most people have had their fair share of those supplies. Response readiness and coordination is also critical as part of this JEEP. And last but not the least is workforce readiness and deployment. So let me attempt to unpack the workforce readiness and deployment. So from the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, our head of state and government did, give a directive that all those responders that African Union deployed, let's put all of them in a database, put all of them together, roster of rapid responders, and they gave their seal of approval. So they formed the basis of the African Volunteer Health Corps. So today we have 850 of that. But you can argue that 850 is a small number, looking at the continent of 1.4 billion people. So in the context of the JIP that was recently launched, so we are going to scale up that number to 3,000. And not only that, we'll be working with our WHO, Afro, and EMRO colleagues to form what we call the AVOC Surge. Again, we know that apart from the African Volunteer Health Corps, the WHO also have their own volunteer health corps, the rapid responders, called Strengthening and Utilizing Response Group for Emergencies. So this is a collaborative initiative, and we're starting with 17 member states, and in fact, some member states had already started, like Tanzania, Malawi, Ethiopia. In fact, Ethiopia has had 2 rounds of training as far as this AVOC surge is concerned. So that's for workforce. Again, the emphasis here is that when there's any outbreak, let the national response take the lead. When they get overwhelmed, we move to the regional level. When the regional level is overwhelmed, then we activate the continental workforce. So let's nip it in the bud at the national level, then regional, then continental. So let me go to response readiness and coordination. In 2022, our head of state and government issued a call to action for each and every member state to set up public health emergency operation center. And the whole idea here is that so that whenever there's any outbreak, we have what it takes to coordinate the different pillars when it comes to responding to emergencies. And for Africa CDC, we are giving ourselves targets that by the year 2027, 90% of our member states should have a functional public health emergency operation center, not just a room with flat screen TVs. We are talking of public health emergency operation center. And in 2024 alone, the target is for us to set 21 or to support 21 member states to build or to put in place a functioning public health emergency operation center. No, the whole emphasis here is that so that they're able to coordinate, whenever there's any outbreak, to put in place a very strong incident management structure whenever there's any outbreak. Let me go to surveillance and disease intelligence, which is also part of the pillar as far as the joint emergency preparedness and response action plan is concerned. So we know that IDSR has worked, very well, but there are still some gaps. So when Africa CDC came on board, we look at that IDSR, and said, okay, you have the indicator-based, you have the event-based surveillance. So we did a very quick assessment. We discovered that the EBS, that's event-based surveillance, is a bit weak, So we decided to focus our energy on that. And in the context of the JIP, so it's one area where Africa CDC will be deploying support to our member states using our MPHIs as the entry point. So in this regard, what we're doing is we've launched a framework, and we also have a training manual, and then we're putting in place a sort of event management system to support our member states so that they have a very robust surveillance in their place. Last but not the least, as far as the JIP is concerned, is around data access. We know that sharing of data is a big issue, especially on the continent of Africa. So what we are doing is to put in place a very robust governance structure that will build our member state capacity to be able to capture this data, warehouse this data, and use that data to inform policy and practice. But much more importantly, share this data, in such a way that allow for coordination and collaboration, and we're able to mount an effective system or response system beyond the borders. So to conclude, for us at Africa CDC, we continue to call for prioritization of multi-sectoral collaborative surveillance, with the framework of within the framework of the integrated disease and surveillance. Number 2 is we continue to work with our MPHI so that this JIP that has been launched together with our WHO, Afro, WHO, AMRO, is not just any other document that get to sit on the shelf, but rather a document that get to be operationalized, that get to be implemented as articulated by these 3 big institutions that really define the global health ecosystem or the public health ecosystem within the continent of Africa. Thank you, and over to you, co-chairs.
Thank you, Taj. It was a tour de force, I think, of the part. It's very interesting and very interesting to hear all those different initiatives. So we've heard a lot about the workforce and around surveillance in the first three presentations. We're going to move to our online participant, Dr. Joy St. John, who's the executive director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, based in TNT, and just. She's going to share the experience of another important initiative that has come out, I think, as a direct result of COVID-19 is the pandemic fund. So to enable the systems that were just described, obviously we do need, or it was recognized, I think, by global leaders that we do need a financing instrument to realize this and to fund much of these initiatives. And Scott also mentioned that in his presentation as a way of funding some of the activities planned under the GHEC. So it'll be very interesting to hear how CARPA plans to use its pandemic fund support for countries in the Caribbean. So I don't know if we have Joy online. Joy, we greet you from Kigali. Good morning. I understand it's very early for you.
Yes,
Thank you.
So can you hear me?
We hear you very well, and the floor is yours.
And can I have my slides? I was told that they would be operated by you, not by me, but I'd like to see them.
Have we got the slides? They're coming.
Okay, so in the meanwhile, I'm going to say that the Caribbean Public Health Agency is a CARICOM institution. CARICOM is the political grouping of English-speaking public health agents of English-speaking countries in the Caribbean. And as a CARICOM institution, we are also lucky to have not only the CARICOM mandate, but also the mandate from our 26 member states. We actually have more member states than CARICOM because of our origins. Can I have the first slide? Okay, so there's a problem with the slides. So I wanted to...
Coming. They're here.
Okay.
They're here. We can see them. They're there.
So this is... It's important to understand that CARPHA is the amalgamation of 5 former regional health institutions. And so we're unusual. We are all things public health. So we have a regional mandate and also national mandates. Next slide, please. We're very young. We're just over 10 years old. And within that CARICOM framework, we already have a framework for working in public health. Functional cooperation in public health. It is called the Caribbean Cooperation in Health. We're in the 4th iteration. And what it does is that we have not only national improvement, and the constructs are all designed by the chief medical officers and various other public health stakeholders or international partners in the region. This 4th iteration ensures that we also have regional public health goods. So although there's national improvement, there's also regional improvement, which reflects the developmental agendas set by the heads of government. Next slide, please. And so we have been able to get the pandemic fund. And how did we get this pandemic fund? We got this pandemic fund through ensuring that we did exactly what we've been always doing as the entities and also now as CARPHA. We ensure that the member states, and this isn't just public health, we also would have discussed this with the heads of government because CARICOM gives us access to the heads of government. We would have got a mandate as to what was required and what was needed in the framework of the pandemic fund. And we have been given our mandate by our heads of government, our member states, and also there has been wide stakeholder collaboration. So we are going to be executing through the project execution unit. This is all being funded through the pandemic fund. There is going to be implementation not only at the national level, but also at the regional level. So again, we are reinforcing the functional cooperation in health. And there are going to be different methodologies, either in person, in country, or virtual. Thank God for the pandemic. It really strengthened our virtual position in the region and a safe virtual position. And we're also going to use events to fast track impact. And right now, we're preparing for the T20 Cricket World Cup, for those of you that know cricket. And this is a way of fast tracking impact because it's 3 years, not usually expected to have impact. Next slide, please. So I was telling you that we have constructs at the regional level. We also have constructs within CARFA, the strategic plan. Again, this is something that is approved by the CARFA Executive Board of our member states and stakeholders. And also we are looking at integrated surveillance strategy, which is something that we started to implement at the CARFA organizational level since I have been the executive director. And we also are a member of the Global Health Security Alliance. So we are using that agenda as well to reinforce the health security. Instead of global, we have CARICOM regional health security. Next slide, please. And I've already described to you the fact that we had all of this constant iteration and approval, even up to the level of heads of government. And so the capacities are going to be not only capacities at the national level, but regional level strengthened. And this is one thing about CARFA. We are outside of the UN system. And so we respond to the mandates of the CARICOM institution and the mandates in our intergovernmental agreement. Next slide, please. I've already described this iterative process, the involvement not only of the member states and the heads of government, but also our international development partners and other stakeholders, and also applying this to the One Health methodology so that we ensure that it was sectors outside of health that were also part of the discussion. And I think that I am coming to the end of my presentation. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so what I have here is a bit of drilling down into one of the pillars of the pandemic fund that we are going to be implementing. And I need to say something really quickly. I'm the vice chair of the technical advisory panel of the pandemic fund board. So I was not involved in the development of this proposal, neither am I implementing. But this is something that CARFA will be doing when I say drilling down. For strengthened human resource capacity for pandemic preparedness and response at both the national and regional levels, these are the things that we want to do. And again, we are plugging this whole issue of improving surveillance and emergency response capacity into existing mechanisms that the member states are comfortable with and have also said are effective at the national level. So we have field epidemiology lab training programs, both frontline and intermediate training. And so we're going to roll that out to make sure that we have a larger cadre of public health workforce. I spoke already about One Health approach. We also have a very heavy climate change, and we've been working collaboratively with PAHO in this regard. And the whole idea of data collection and analysis, especially at the frontline level, we know that this has to be strengthened because we saw where our weaknesses were during the pandemic. We very much involved in finding out what worked as well as what didn't work and trying to improve it. And then establishing a regional deployment network and training in rapid teams. And I have not spoken about the other CARICOM institutions. CARPHA is part of the CARICOM security cluster, where we work very closely with regular security, disaster preparedness, and we provide the health security perspective. And so a lot of our implementation will also involve our partners at the regional level. So there is strengthening of the CARICOM, the CARPHA, the national, and the overall CARICOM regional perspectives. And I think I'm done.
Yeah, wonderful.
Strengthening your collaborative surveillance. We have now one of our executive board members on the panel, Prof. Amir Khan, to share Pakistan's experience in terms of a case study of how they strengthen surveillance, integrated disease surveillance. Prof, floor is yours.
So much. It's a great opportunity to present my country's case. Thank you so much. Now, we all are familiar with International Health Regulation 2005, and in the light of that, the real-time surveillance. And I would put a great regard to joint external evaluation. And the first round started around 2016 and a little bit around late 2015. And Pakistan was among the first country in the region and third in the world to undergo the joint external evaluation. And I think that worked very well. And how I'm going to narrate it in my next few slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, we started working on so many things, but one of the main pillars that we worked has been the integrated disease surveillance and response. We started the initial pilot with the great support of UK, HSA, then Public Health England. A lot of regard for Duncan for extending all that support during that time. And based basically upon three pillars, that are the structure, the human resource, and the core function. And we are very much familiar what are the requisites at the international and the national level. I can't move. Yeah, thank you so much. And now we started off with having dedicated teams at the federal level. At the federal level, we have National Institute of Health, which also serves as the National Public Health Institutes. And moving on to the provincial and regional level, we are a big country, heavily populated with over 250 million population burden. The IDSR progress in Pakistan has taken a very gradual, but a very robust and a formidable manner. In 2016, the initial assessment, having the report, we actually knew what were the gaps on the ground. And these started working and plugging in those gaps. And 17 was the time, basically, we started in as a pilot project in one of the largest province, that is the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And then from there, we moved on to the federal level. The IDSR progress definitely, as we extended with certain priority diseases. Initially, we selected 8, and then we moved on to the provinces, started training the people. And as we moved on, next slide, please. It's been really great because as it was brought to the federal level and we wanted to have the other 3 provinces and 2 regions integrated with the partners also joined hand together. Definitely, we'll talk about the role of WHO in this regard as well. Next slide, please. Now, one of the important things that I would like to highlight is the IANPHI peer-to-peer review. And I've got great regards from one of my very close friend, Sue, sitting at the back. In 2018, we had a week-long meeting undergoing the peer-to-peer review. And again, based upon the JE, this peer-to-peer review through IANPHI was again a platform whereby we could build upon that. And that really helped us during the crisis once COVID was there. Next slide, please. Well, different department. We not only strategized for the surveillance all across the country, we started working on other things as well. We started having the public health lab networks, integrating them at the national level, establishing the data systems which are compatible not only at the national level, but also at the international level. And I think DHIS2 came as a big respite for that. Seeing the progress, I mean, other partners also joined. We had CDC, we had GSI and USAID, Fleming Fund, and working on different. And what we did, I mean, they were having their own projects as well, like GHSA, AMR. We tried to integrate, and the model basically in a developing country like Pakistan, which has been successful, is that strategizing at the national level, seeing what NPHI could do, what the Ministry of Health can do, and what the partners can now join in various areas without duplication. Because my own realization in developing countries, not only duplication, there is triplication and quadruplication of effort. So we totally nurtured in a way that we were avoiding all those things and the hurdles coming, whether bureaucratic or political in the way as well. Next slide, please. Now, based upon that, I mean, just a busy slide, but what I wanted to let you know that we have 159 districts, and we have been very successful in establishing a disease surveillance and response unit in each of the units that is well knitted and well integrated at the national level within the NPHI at Islamabad. And out of those, 149 are fully trained people through different sources, again, with the help of different partners and donors, and definitely. Now, we took this model back to, next slide, please. Now, as we moved on, definitely, we also nurtured our FETP program, which was a baby of CDC US for over a decade. And there was a huge pressure to institutionalize. And we have been very successful because we, again, were able to convince the government and we could get the funding. And we are among very few countries which has now taken over the responsibility from. So this is the sustenance model. So sustenance must come from the government, and that can really help a lot. So as we moved on, not only we kept strengthening our systems, but side by side, we looked toward the government for the sustenance. And why? Because the models have been successful. Next slide, please. As you can on this slide, I mean, 159 districts, everyone having a disease response unit. And then we started, we had a public health national lab at the national level in Islamabad and in PHI. And we started evolving with the regional and provincial labs all across the country and then knitting them together. So this I would say has been a great success. And side by side, during the COVID crisis, Scott is sitting and must appreciate the grant that came down from the Gates Foundation. We established a National Genomic Center. And the model again was that providing an umbrella whereby other public, private institutes, academia, they could join us. And still the model is working and functioning very well. Next slide, please. This is the data flow. I'm not going to detail them, starting from the district level, coming down to the regional, provincial, and then centralized. And next slide, please. And what we did was, just to give you an example, how methodical and deep they are. This is the data that we are receiving. We even calculate how much of compliance from the district level is coming. Next slide, please. Just giving you examples that, I mean, bothered about the 33 diseases which you prioritized some time back and under the umbrella of One Health. That has really worked, again, very well. We have trained many people in this regard. Next slide, please. We're hearing about, I mean, some very important diseases in the country, malaria, cholera, typhoid, and we are very watchful. Next slide, please. And you see the compliance, and wherever there is a red lit area, that means that district or that area is not fully compliant. So automatically the attention is directly diverted toward that region, and we send our teams for analysis and plugging those gaps. Next slide, please. This is what we have started some time back, and the weekly report. And again, it is published and it goes down to all the districts. And I think it's very helpful for the policymakers. And that's what we have done. Just considering that we have had episode of XDR typhoid, and with that, we launched the vaccine, and we were again the first country in the world to launch the conjugate vaccine, and again worked very well. Next slide, please. So we, during COVID crisis, we also established the National Data Center for Health Informatics. And not only that, we again built upon the capacities that were already available. We have we started off with the cancer registry and other non-communicable disease registry, and integrating them at the national level. And finally, coming up again, I'd say for the bureaucracy, for the politicians, we need to have data-driven and evidence-based policy. And this again was the base for that. Next slide, please. Well, way forward is we keep moving on and strengthening along with the government, along with the donors and partners. Next slide, please. And definitely, as we already have emergency operating center, as you're truly right, not only those screens, but moving on with so many other things. The actual strength is the trained human resource. Next slide, please. Just to let you know, in the end, I mean, success indicators for consecutive 2 years, we won the IANPHI award. And similarly, we have been frequently winning the clinical director awards from TEFINET as far as the human resource training is concerned. Next slide, please. Just to say, I mean, as I said yesterday, and we hear this morning again, together we can say, whatever the difficult circumstances, it's only that we have to work together as a team. And the verses that I just contemplated my own verses yesterday that so many people were asking. I was just contemplated while I was sitting over here. So thank you so much. We fight as a team. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And really interesting to see how a lot of those initiatives come together at country level. So we'll hear from another country or member's perspective. Stephen Riley is the Director General of Data Analytics and Surveillance at UKHSA, as it's now called, in the UK, and he'll be talking about the UK's development of a Centre for Pandemic Preparedness, but also the linkages to some of the global initiatives we've already heard about, like the IPSN. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking. Can you hear through the mic there? It's always great to be on such a fantastic panel. Going last is difficult because you do feel the need to try and respond. So I will try not to be. Is that actually working? Can you hear me? How's that? Is that okay? Okay, it's definitely one of the, it's good for video conferencing this because it doesn't pick up any sound. So it's great to be on such a fantastic panel. It's always tempting to react and to kind of alter. So I'll try and stick a little bit to the points that I was originally going to try to make. But at the end, I'm also going to try and seed a few thoughts and observations from our point of view to hopefully kind of lead into the discussion. So I'm just going to describe the agency a little bit for people who are not fully familiar. And then I'll introduce the Centre for Pandemic Preparedness and mention how it's integrating with some of those global initiatives before I kind of give some more provocative thoughts at the end. So many of you will be familiar with UKHSA. We were formed in 2021, but not everyone is, and I picked that up from comments during the meeting. So we were brought together from the prior Public Health England and the really large pandemic entities, Test and Trace, and something called the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So as we came together in October 2021, we were very large because we incorporated all of the community testing and lots of other capabilities. So part of our job has been right-sizing that very large operation into an enduring capacity, an enduring capability, with a clear revised mission to prepare for, prevent, and respond to emergencies. So if you're interested in more detail, our 3-year strategic priorities are online. If you just Google UKHSA strategic priorities, you can see what we've laid out for those first 3 years. But the kind of decisions that we've had to go through kind of really do feed into the topic of this discussion. And just before I introduce CPP, I think to kind of reflect some of Scott's comments about how I personally have come here. Prior to the pandemic, I'd studied respiratory viruses for many years, doing analytics and primary data gathering. My first real academic work was on SARS-1 in collaboration with Hong Kong U. So when the pandemic struck, I did a combination of modeling and analytics, and then did a lot of primary data gathering through the REACT program as well. And I think that there's a responsibility on lots of us who had those extreme experiences in the pandemic to make sure that the learnings are played forward. It was a unique moment where in many places resources were released and people were able to follow through on ideas they'd had for ages. Many of them because of Scott's great stewardship, I'm sure, at Gates, but there were many funders around the world. It's really important that we make the best of that learning as well as deciding on the actual capabilities that we bring forward. And within UKHSA, one of the ways that we're doing that is through something called the Centre for Pandemic Preparedness. And it's a relatively small operation. It's within our policy unit and it's driven by a small number of policy officials. It's not technical experts. It was set up as part of a bilateral agreement with the US from the conference in 2021. And it's supposed to provide a strategic approach across the whole of government for making sure that we can respond more quickly and effectively. So one of the first points I'd really like to emphasize is, although we're an important agency in the pandemic response in the UK, we're only one part of the pandemic response. And when the stakes escalate, you bring in many, many other players, as is entirely appropriate. We will probably govern a lot of the enduring capabilities in between emergencies, but we have to bear in mind, we've got to constantly be aware of how the dynamics change when the stakes will increase again. So kind of coming back to what our job has been for the last few years and how the Centre for Pandemic Preparedness helps us do that, we've been trying to think out what to keep, what to be able to scale up explicitly, what to have a really good plan and potentially contracts in place to be able to scale up, and then what to not worry about right now. And you can put all of your issues into those three buckets. And the middle one of those is not a zero cost option. So saying that you're not going to carry a capacity, but that you intend to scale it up, and you go to your ministers and say, that's our plan for testing, that's our plan for contact tracing or whatever it is, that actually takes a lot of work and consumes quite a bit of kind of leadership overhead. So we're finding quite a lot of difficult choices in those spaces. Just kind of briefly calling out that, we are interested in working, and we've got lots of international engagement. Many of you know Neil. Neil is part of UKHSA, as well as being a driving force in IANPHI, and he's one of a number of people who try to ensure we're making the most effective global partnerships. And we've already heard about the recognition for the novel variant assessment platform that was recognized this morning. That was a very large network of partner countries where we provided training and funding to increase the amount of sample obtaining and sequencing that we could do. So it really increased the speed and the volume of publicly available COVID-19 sequences, SARS-CoV-2 sequences that were available. And during those key phases, like during the takeoff of Omicron and at other times, it provided, really good additional intelligence. And we've already heard about the international international pathogen sharing network, which we're also supporting. And I fully endorse the attempt to keep that genomics community together in between emergencies. We support the Pandemic Accord, and then one of the other things we think about, which is not international collaboration, but again, thinking back to how emergencies work within our own country, we also dock into the biological security strategy, which is a kind of cabinet office. It's a level of preparedness above our agency. So I just wanted to kind of call out some of those. And then, conscious of time, but I'd like to kind of make a few more. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce the agency and myself a little bit and talk about how we're trying to deal with these issues. I'd be happy to follow up on any of those details. But, I'd also like to kind of make some more provocative thoughts a little bit about how we do this. And one thing that we try and maintain when we're planning the surveillance and response is, it's a very well-made point, is that you can't predict the future. So we shouldn't prepare for COVID. That's definitely a mistake. But you can predict the past. So when we think about changes and deciding the enduring capability that we're going to play forward, you can look in your own country and play backwards through time and see, of the 20 or 30 recent threats, many of which didn't turn into a massive issue, how would your new initiative have played out against those observed threats? My academic background is in modeling. There's nothing wrong with a good model to test out what you're planning to do, but that should not be the first step. The first step is to really make sure you've gone back through history and looked at the characteristics of previous threats. And I think that can really help us in our preparedness planning. And then I think, to stick to time as much as I can, probably make just one more point, again, trying to be provocative. We are a bit of a choir singing to ourselves here. More preparedness, more surveillance is always good. But many of us here also have to be in discussions where the resources are allocated to different important things, other parts of health, other parts of preparedness. And I think one thing we might work on more is a shared vision of how you present the benefits in such a way that you can right size the thing that you're proposing. And it applies at a different level in I think, to all of us. And I find that very difficult in my work. It's very easy to say what the great things are about additional surveillance, additional COVID surveys, but it's much more difficult when you're trading off against why you shouldn't do the next little bit of surveillance. And I think that's something that we probably all share and that we might be able to support each other on a little bit more. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for kicking us off into a hopefully critical discussion. We've got about 20 minutes for discussion. We're going to go 5 minutes over. Natalie's going to do the closing because we started 11 minutes late, so still very efficient. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Share any of those aspects. I think we heard a lot about lots of initiatives. I think one of the things that struck me from the presentations, which I want to give back to this room, is that quite a lot of these initiatives try to replicate the IANPHI spirit, right? So what we have in this room informally, that kind of trust, and how can we bring that into the more formal mechanism? But I think there are so many aspects of sharing. Stephen pushed us also to think a bit critical about how we deal with the resources. And we had those experiences. So please, who wants to go first? Please, colleague at the back. Do we have a roving mic or am I roving?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm called Edson. I work with RBC at the head of disease surveillance and emergency response. So my comment goes to how we should embark on collaborative surveillance, as I just mentioned, and how Rwanda has taken a step ahead in terms of making sure that we really dive deep and understand how this surveillance approach would benefit the country. I think one component that most people lean towards when talk about collaborative surveillance is much more they lean towards human health, and we tend to lag behind the animal health. And the country, when some few years ago, we had an outbreak of river fever. I'm just giving you examples. And during this period, we understood that whenever animals are affected, also humans are also affected. And we're looking at the system in place. We found, like Pakistan just mentioned, how our surveillance system, our epidemiological digital tools are in place. We are somehow too far ahead of the animal side. And we took this step on how we could embrace the collaborative surveillance within One Health approach. And by doing this, we initiated a One Health surveillance tool. And this is just similar to the tool that we already have. We leverage on the existing tools such as IDSR. And now the animal side are reporting most of the zoonotic diseases within the system. Not only that they're reporting these within the system, but also get informed and also prevent any spillover before there's a human also affected. So this is one of the approach I feel like is a way of boosting our warning system and getting much more prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Point. And here Eric.
Yes. Thank you very much from some very, very good talks. And it's really nice to see all these initiatives. I have two comments to the two WHO talks. And the first is to Sarah. And it's really, really nice to see how you're working to get all these information together and how we can collaborate better. I think one very, very critical thing is once we have an outbreak is to get the basics in place as fast as possible. And I think looking back, we are not always very good at that. Some things we get very fast, but in particular, the true severity of a new outbreak is very, very difficult to estimate early. And basically, we quite often tend to overestimate severity of outbreaks for the individual. So I think it would be very important that we share basic outbreak protocols, and even like we share that because we know that these outbreaks, they will be crossing borders. So also early measures to share those data across borders so we get a better overview of what's happening. And then to Scott's presentation, also very, very nice, very, very important. Representing Statens Serum Institute in Denmark, we were in many instances lucky during the COVID-19. We had a good surveillance system, good epidemiological data. So we were lucky to be able to share some of this information often, but most often in bilateral meetings. So I completely agree, we need more international meetings. But when we're talking about friendships and colleagues, I think we also need to focus a lot of that these should be institutional friendships, because right now I'm here as the CEO of Statens Serum Institute, but sooner or later that will be someone else. And then of course that needs to be replaced, because the reason why I knew something about what's happening in Denmark was because I was sitting in Statens Serum Institute. So I think we need to take that institutional aspect into consideration and not only the personal connections. Thank you.
We'll go to Andrea, and then I'm going to come back to the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Andrea Ammon from ECDC. I want to come back to the preparedness aspect. And so your provocation worked with me, and actually. What we have seen is that the pandemic had ramifications not only in the health sector, but everywhere. And so I think one lesson learned to set up a pandemic preparedness center that covers the whole government, I think is definitely the way to go. We have launched a foresight program where we look at drivers for future developments and have developed scenarios that are, in the first place, independent of infectious diseases. These scenarios, they are projected into 2040, so really far ahead. And then what we want to break down now, and that is what we are doing with different stakeholders, is what can we do today to prepare for these scenarios? Because here I agree with you. Of course, we have to look back, but the past can give us clues only for situations that we encountered in the past and not for what might come in the future. And we can't predict this, I agree. But we can put scenarios where we can see how could it be? And are there things that we could put in place today that would help us for several of these scenarios? So, and that I think is where the scenarios show all that it's very complex. The world will get even more complex than it is today. And that has implications for preparedness, but it also has implications for something that we do right now as our core task, risk assessments. We have seen that risk assessments cannot be done for infectious diseases only. You have to take into account an environmental aspect, a chemical aspect, a zoonotic aspect. And we have found that these other actors are not prepared to do quick risk assessments. They do risk assessments, but they take reviews and take months, and you don't have this time. So we are now also training these other agencies, environment, chemical, and so forth, for protocols that allow us to come to a quick risk assessment when we have combined hazards, as we had, for instance, with the floods, where the floods flooded storage for agricultural chemicals. And then all of a sudden we had this mixture, and we had no one who provide the expertise to assess the risk for that. So that is, I think, what we also should keep in mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got two more hands, but I'm going to go back to the panel and then we'll do another round of questions. So Sarah, Scott, Stephen, and then Touch, you seemed like you wanted to come in. Should we do the response?
I wanted to respond to two of the questions that the importance of the networks. I fully agree. I think the purpose of everybody being here this week is to demonstrate the power and the necessity of having these networks. And so one of the things that we're also trying to do is to both tap into these networks that exist. Field epidemiology is another great example of bringing networks together. But there's also in the impact in an outbreak and a pandemic particularly, there's a lot of other networks that are influencing the way that we work. There's the academic sector, and a lot of the data is coming through the academic sector. There's the donors, and the donors are often driving how we prioritize and deliver, particularly for lower middle income countries. There's the non-health sector. And so one of the things that we also want to do in addition to bringing those health networks together is to bring the other actors into the room and to be able to connect the regions who are doing immensely good work and bringing their own networks together to allow the regions to learn between each other. So yes, very, very much noted that bringing that together prior to an emergency and being able to help collect and disseminate different types of things like protocols. The second thing that I wanted to address was Edson, and maybe just as a little bit of a shout out to RBC and our collaborations with Rwanda. One of the things that we've established at the Pandemic Hub in Berlin is we have seats for 120 people, but actually 60 of those are staff and the other 60 are partners. So we have a great relationship with Johanna. We're sorry, we steal a lot of her staff, but we actually have co-location with a number of our KI staff. We had RBC with Edson come and work with us on a short-term assignment, which we learned from as much, if not far more than actually than he did. So particularly bringing home the example of how we do integration between the health and the environmental and animal sectors. So also that's something that we're very interested in with the partners is how we can do these different types of assignments, how we can co-locate, how we can kind of build those partnerships. We do have the resources to help establish those either with us or with other areas of WHO.
Thank you. So I think just to complement what Sarah has just said. So if you take time and look at that JEP, that's the Joint Emergency Preparedness and Response Action Plan, which is a document that's put together by WHO, AFRO, WJMRO, and Africa CDC to cover the 55 member states. So that document actually speaks to the importance of coordination, collaboration, cooperation, and communication. So beyond these three major institutions, in that document, you also see the different disciplines, making a lot of contributions, clear roles and responsibilities for them, the different sectors beyond the Ministries of Health, agriculture, planning, environment, all have a role to play as far as that spaces are concerned. Let me take, for instance, if you look at surveillance, when we came on board, the first framework we launched was more human health focused. So when we revised that framework, that's version 2.0, that's sometimes early last year, what we did was to make sure that it has one health focus, meaning that we brought together all those different sectors, especially given the fact that that more than 70% of the outbreaks we are talking about these days are of animal origin. So I think for me, it's really in our own best interest to make sure that all those key sectors, are carried along using One Health, as our basis for really moving some of this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Scott, do you want to come in on that?
I do. Three quick comments on the issues that were raised. First, on the issue of institutions, not just friends. I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. It's both institutional representatives and individuals. And as an example, in the US, for example, who would be the people you would want involved in this? You can predict some people at the time would have been somebody like Tony Fauci and others who are likely to be pulled in. And then there's those that you can't predict. President Trump had a guy in, I forget, Ajax, I think his name was, who advised people to drink bleach. There's some things that just can't be predicted ahead of time, but having the right institutions and individuals is critical. On Andre's point about multi-sector being important, absolutely. And in the event of a pandemic, if we think that we in the health sector are the ones who are going to be in charge and making the decisions, we're kidding ourselves. It's going to involve lots of other sectors, and we're going to have to play a part in that. And we learned that, or were reminded of it. And then finally, Stephen, you commented on the playoff of resources, and I completely agree. My former boss, big boss, Bill Gates, who's surprisingly sensible when it comes to financing things, said, look, a pandemic is $1 trillion problem. And so as we think about Global Health Emergency Corps, we think about that $1 trillion problem. We believe working on a pandemic will help us with all of the other problems that we have and to do health emergencies better. But there is no other $1 trillion problem in public health. And so if we can frame what we do in terms of controlling the next pandemic and doing the other things we know we need to do, that's a unique financing argument.
Thanks. Yeah, I might just briefly come back on a couple of those points. The foresight exercise sounds fantastic, and I definitely wasn't saying only focus on the past. I think my view of scenarios prior to 2020, prior to 2014, prior to 2009 is that the planning scenarios were too narrow. So in generating, I'd imagine your experts that are informing your foresight are really thinking about the biological variability that's out there and thinking how that's going to go forward, as well as the changing human factors. So I definitely wasn't saying only look at the past. And then, Scott mentioned, really very difficult scenarios in the future, perhaps higher severity. And we talked about how we share characteristics in the early stages of a new pandemic. Just, that we need a bit more variability there as well. So right now, one of my worst case scenarios is lower overall fatality rate, but a more uniform severity across ages. So I think if the total could be lower, but if it was much more of an impact for younger people, the global dynamics would be very different. And then the attitude towards a lot of social elements would be difficult. So I think we've got to be a bit creative on the scenarios as well.
Thank you. Amin, do you want to come in quickly?
Very quickly. You see, a huge learning is coming out of COVID, and I think it's all because of that. We hear a lot about the pandemic treaty, the pandemic fund coming up, all the bodies, I think, working together jointly. We talking in particular about the future global health initiative, all the donors and partners, now truly focusing on the health system strengthening. And once we talk of the health system, definitely it contains all the environments and animal side, climate side, and everything underneath it. And then focusing on the universal health coverage, primary health coverage, never had that much of importance. And top of the line, I think the public health in the developing countries, it was not realized at that important specialty, and it has really gained momentum. I think what we need to is that based upon this current circumstances and the chances and opportunities that have evolved out of the circumstances, we must avail, and I'm sure that will lead to much more formidable planning and a better future.
Thank you. And I want to go back and collect those two comments from the floor, even though now we've got 4. We'll do our best. George, please.
George Shakarishvili from TEFINET. First of all, big thank you to all presenters. It's interesting to hear so many different perspectives. There were 2 interesting concepts that I captured from this discussion. One was the difference between interconnectedness and integration. And I think I agree with the concept that integration is much more complex, much more difficult to achieve, and may not always be necessary. And the reason I'm saying this is that this is IANPHI's meeting. And of course, the center of attention here is how to support and how to contribute to strengthening capacities of national public health institutes. But let's keep in mind that the slide that Scott showed with the triangle and different levels, in addition to national public health institutes, there are other national entities who are stakeholders of that triangle. And one of them are the institutions which my organization represents. These are field epidemiology training programs. And we should keep in mind that similar discussions and similar meetings are happening where the focus of attention are FETPs, not NPHIs. And I think it is of paramount importance to interconnect these discussions. We as coordination mechanisms, TEFINET and IANPHI, we have very good collaboration and we speak to each other on a regular basis. But I think we should move from speaking to joint actions. And that's where interconnectedness come together. Because when we speak about strengthening national capacities, not strengthening national capacity of institutions in silo. We need to strengthen national capacity in interconnected way. So I hope that the GHAC can be and should be one of those platforms that brings together various national entities and strengthens capacity in a holistic way. And we are really looking forward to contributing to that. Okay. Thank you.
Great, very clear ask. And we go here.
I think we are at a very critical junction where the national public health institutes are going to be critical in leading and helping WHO and Africa CDC and other institutions to integrate and coordinate a lot of initiatives. Too many initiatives, too much jargons, and when some of us at district level cannot even interpret these things, it's lost in translation. So I would like to take on what my colleague here said, the last from Denmark, as well as the excellent example from Pakistan, is the collaboration, institutional exchange between the public health institutes, a two-way exchange, not one way. That's important because somehow a lot of things are coming down and not going up. So if we can build that exchange, I mean, from Zimbabwe, we talk about Danish Bilharzia Laboratory, which goes back to the foundations of Public Health Institute in Denmark. It was a real two-way collaboration. So I think, again, Pakistan gave a good example of the two-way collaboration with UK Public Health. And that's the model we need to work, where we all work together to show results at the district level. District level, not the national level. District level. The operation centers, the integrated disease surveillance, the field epidemiology. That's the rapid response teams at the district level. That's the key. Not what's going on at the global level in either Geneva or Berlin or wherever. It's where it hits the ground in Punjab or where it hits the ground in Limpopo or wherever. So I really want to emphasize that this is the key, but I'll also want to come back to one thing. We have failed with large amount of money in the Global Fund. We've failed with a lot of Gates money into malaria elimination or control of HIV. We should learn why. And that's the point which was made by Stephen. It's not, and again, Gavi is putting so many new vaccines, but we are unable to contain measles, both in the north and south. So these are the points which I'm saying is that the pandemic fund will fail again if there's no public health inside and the focus is on service delivery. Thank you.
Okay, I'm terrible at timekeeping, but we'll do one more from the floor and then I'm going to hand it back to Natalie.
Thank you to the panelists, Kasum Jallo from the Health Workforce Department in WHO headquarters. It's very nice to hear all these great initiatives and frankly, it's going the right direction. The issue is that the person who will be in charge of implementing all what you say in the district, at the district level, will need to understand all those initiatives, and this is only you. WFP, FAO, World Health and Animal Organization, they are also developing the same initiatives and etc. And all of this is dumped into one district officer who has to understand all of this and implement. It will not be possible. How can we come as one is simplification so that they will be able to implement at that level, because this is where we can see the results. Otherwise, what will happen is we all continue to produce documents, to produce framework, to produce initiative, to say we have to work together. All of this is right, is great. At the end of the day, how all of this is coming together at that level? I think that's a question that I want the panel to react on. Thank you.
Okay, I feel the momentum is going in that direction. Last word, Mika. Sorry, apologies, Natalie.
Thanks, I'll be brief. I'll just say that I think that the IANPHI is in a state of maturation where the institutional friendship is working, because I'm new, and my boss was here, the previous boss was here before, so it works. What I want to remind you all about is that when we talk about pandemic preparedness, there is one part which I think is still missing, which is actually, and I would like to challenge actually the question of the trillion dollar or euro, whatever problem, because public health has many other trillion-dollar questions. If you count everything which public health covers and the loss of life and productivity, which is there, referring to what was just said previously by my colleagues about the lack of public health in the broad term, I think we can get to those trillions. But my issue was that if we talk about scenarios, we should also talk about the consequences of the collateral damage that happened during the pandemic due to all the COVID restrictions. And that is a very thorny question. One of my major frustrations during the pandemic, when I was doing this in Finland for 3 years, was that we could not answer the question, if we do this, what will that do to the children, the youth, the elderly who are locked into their places because of safety and worries about COVID? You know, these are very difficult questions. I posed them to my colleagues at the NCD department. They said, oh, we have to study and we'll tell you in 2 years. That's not the answer I wanted to hear. That's not the answer that the government wanted to hear. And we should be better as public health institutions to actually try to look at those questions also. Thank you.
So colleagues, thank you for sharing your incredible wisdom. Could I have the slide, please? What I think we should do certainly is utilize the scenarios that have been developed by ECDC and do scenario planning, enactment, and desktop tabletop exercises at district level to prepare for future. So I'm going to wrap up with all the comments, inputs, and the incredible insights from our panel members in a philosophical conclusion. If you look at this wonderful, innovative rope mechanism, I don't know how many of you are familiar with making a rope. Next slide, please. But it requires, the first thing is intention. We need to make a rope. We need to integrate. We need to consolidate. We need to collaborate. So all those nice fancy words, if you just use the video of this rope making exercise, a rope can be used for good intentions and also bad intentions. Next slide, please. So that intention happens at grassroots level. It happens between scientists within an institution. It happens between scientists and the IT professional within institution. It happens between institutions. It happens between your district and your institution. So let us be really intentional about what we want to do, how do we come together, and who comes together, and what aspects of our wide purview of public health we want to bring together. Next one. Now this rope, when we collaborate, has weak threads. Sometimes it's as thin as a thread of grass. Sometimes it's as strong as bamboo. And there are different strengths, and we need to play on the strengths and weaknesses of that integration, collaboration, and work together. to move this forward. Next slide, please. And some of these are going to have knots in the way. They're going to need to be tied firmer. And sometimes you're going to have to cut what we don't need, as was alluded to. We have to let go of what's not required. But it does require continuous training of how to build that rope, the strengthening and the redirectioning, but it's trust. We're building a rope for greater good and for public good. And the new collaborations of what we need to add in this rope is something that we need to continuously explore. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think that's the last one. Did you get stuck? All right, so I'll conclude. I'll conclude then with that philosophical picture of us building a rope in terms of strengthening our collaboration. And when we go back, let us think within our institutions, where do we need to collaborate within the institution and then immediately outside the institutions? And what can we do to strengthen those partnerships? Because a collaboration is built on trust, it's built on relationships, and how do we maintain those relationships? I thank you to the panel members. I thank you to the audience for your brilliant insights. And I do thank my co-chair. Right.
Okay, so a few announcements. So there is a short break now, up to noon, and then from noon to 1 o'clock, there is a possibility for the regional meetings to meet. So Africa Network will stay in this room, and Europe and Asia Network will be upstairs, first floor. And then we will come back after lunch here at 2 p.m. for the session on health inequality and social determinants. Thank you so much.
There are some documents on the WHO roadmap that I'm going to leave on this first table from the session yesterday. So if anyone wants any more information on the roadmap, these are on the table.
Of all the magic places in the world I've been to, this is where my heart is. Oh, you know it's true. No matter where I go, I'm coming home to you. Been walking down the street so many times, my feet know every brick and stone. Could wear a blindfold. No matter what I do, I'm coming home to you. And I don't know why, don't know why. I'm always feeling homesick. Oh. All I know, this is where my heart is. Oh. I've seen many places where the beauty never ends.